Welcome back to another week on the Jolly Swagman podcast. I'm Joe.
I'm Angus.
And this week we speak with one of the world's foremost scholars on ancient Stoicism, Margaret Graver. But wait, I hear you ask, what the frick is Stoicism, Angus and Joe, my dudes?
Well, it's an ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, and you'll probably be familiar with some of the big daddies of the Stoic world. I'm thinking Aurelius, Seneca,
Epictetus, the founder.
Allegedly. We'll get back to that later. And maybe even Cato for a few of you well-read ancient Stoic buffs.
Since the Greeks founded it and the late Romans developed it, it's been picked up by any number of pop icons. Let me rattle a few off for y'all. Some of our favourite authors, actually, but you've got Ryan Holiday, the former director of marketing at American Apparel, who wrote The Obstacle is the Way.
He's a big one.
He's big. He turns to Margaret Graver when he wants advice. We'll come back to that. You've got Tim Ferriss, the podcaster and author, loves Stoicism. You've got Alain de Botton, the pop philosopher.
Yep.
You've got Mark Manson, who just wrote that book.
It's on bookshelves everywhere in every airport and every train station around the world.
The Subtle Art of How Not to Give a Frick.
Yep.
And you've even got, another one of our favourite authors, Nassim Taleb, writes a lot about Stoicism.
He does. So it's definitely been picked up, and it's had this modern spin put on it, sort of Stoic light, I guess you'd call it.
How would you describe modern Stoicism?
Modern Stoicism boils down to not letting external things worry you, so only worrying about what you can control.
That's it in a nutshell, I think.
Yeah. So, and it is great. It's very applicable, and Margaret even concedes that it is very useful for modern life. But we just had one question, Joe.
And that question was the question of this podcast. Could the real Stoicism please stand up? Because what we want to know is this modern take on Stoicism, is it really the same interpretation that the actual founders, the ancient Greeks and Romans, had of their own philosophy?
And that's where Margaret Graver comes in. She is the go-to for all the names we just listed, all the modern pop Stoic icons. She's the go-to for questions on what the real Stoic is.
She's the Aaron Lawrence Professor of Classics at Dartmouth. She got her PhD at Brown University. She taught at Princeton, and she wrote one of the most acclaimed academic texts on Stoicism, Stoicism and Emotion.
So she certainly has the qualifications to come on the Jolly Swagman podcast. In this episode, it's a bit of a funny one. We go into our inaugural game of Stoic Quote Tournament.
Listen out for that in about 10 minutes' time, and we finally concede to Margaret that Epictetus is not the founder of Stoicism.
Yeah, it's if you ever want to watch Joe get his pants pulled down and spanked by the Margaret Lawrence Professor, then get into Aaron Lawrence Professor, then listen in for that one.
I was being flippant. I know he's not the founder. It's some other
it's
guy.
obvious now, isn't it?
And one final thing we should add, we've gotten a lot better than this. We're sorry, but Skype wasn't performing for us today.
It's only at the very end for our final five, but we've tidied it up, so hopefully you don't notice, but apologies.
Don't use Skype, people.
Without much further ado,
hit it.
All the way from their Sydney studio, you're listening to The Jolly Swagman, the podcast on unusual topics with exceptional guests, with your hosts, Angus and Joe.
Margaret, thank you so much for joining us on the Jolly Swagman podcast.
That's my pleasure.
So to start us off then, how would you describe Stoicism to the average person who's never heard about it before?
Well, let's see. There's a lot to it, but I think I would say that it was a philosophical movement. It got started in the generation after Aristotle, and that it is grounded in a belief in the importance of character and the. It sounds a bit odd to say, but the rational nature of the universe and of the human being.
The rational nature of the universe and of the human being, that's probably important to talk about and get this out of the way early, because pop Stoicism, or the sort of modern Stoicism propounded by people like Tim Ferriss and Ryan Holiday and Mark Manson, suggests that it's an attitude towards life, but really it was a whole worldview, including a system of physics as well, which was rather unusual.
Yes, absolutely.
And the translation of Meditations that Ryan Holiday recommends in particular is the Gregory Hayes one, which we'll link to in the show notes. And Gregory does a brilliant introduction in that book, but he actually explains that Stoicism is more than what people think of today when they think of being Stoic. And Stoics had this idea of the logos, which was material to the universe. Could you explain the kind of the other weirder elements of this worldview that were prevalent around the time of the late Roman Stoics?
Well, I think that perhaps the way to begin is to think what your alternatives are. So, should we think of a universe in which there's no reason for the things that happen? That is, at a very basic level, must there be causes for the events that we see? A scientific perspective in our modern eras would say, yes, absolutely. Well, we think that the things that happen, they definitely have things that make them happen, causes. We're just not always aware of what exactly they are. But if you thought that things could happen quite randomly, or in a kind of capricious manner, just because some deity for no reason at all waved a hand and said that it must happen, then you're not thinking scientifically, are you? That seems obvious in a way, and yet the magical thinking is also present in our era. And that, I think, is exactly what the ancient Stoics were trying to work against, a kind of magical thinking about the world that we live in, as opposed to a rational conception. There's systems. There's an order to things. There's regularities within the universe. We might say mathematical regularities, and they would as well.
So that's
the start, anyway.
That's the start, yeah, and that's the kind of the scientific half of Stoicism, which we don't really think about anymore today. And then, of course, there's the ethical component, which is how should one live one's life. And Alain de Botton, the philosopher has and founder of the School of Life, has a great summary for Stoicism in a nutshell in one of his videos, which we can link to as well. And he basically says Stoicism is the idea that life is hard, but you're stronger than you think. Do you think that's a good summary, or what would your alternative definition be?
You're stronger than you think. I can see where one would be coming from to give that sort of summary, but it isn't the summary that I would give. That is, I think there's a popular conception which is probably derived from the little s Stoic usage of in our, in modern English, where stoic or stoical means tough it out, don't react, don't be emotional, as if you're a kind of Teflon person. That is perhaps an expression of strength, and I do think strength is very important, but it's not the center. The center goes back to this notion that you're in a rational universe. There is a kind of intelligence to the world, and you are a representative of the species which is the most intelligent, or really the only intelligent living animal. So you as well are reason-driven. There are reasons for the things that you do, for your actions. Claiming that rational nature of the human is, I think, the center of Stoicism. And perhaps it does mean thinking through whether this thing that has just happened really is all that important, or is really central to your experience in the world. And if it's not, maybe it's not that big a deal.
So clearly then Stoicism sort of morphed from the ancient, the original intention to maybe being modernized for the current society in which we live in.
Yes.
In order to give our viewers maybe an insight into some of the original, tenets of Stoicism and some of the original literature, maybe now it's time to turn to our Stoic quote tournament, which which for those who aren't familiar, for those few out there, we're going to give our favourite Stoic quotes one by one. There'll be 3 rounds, 1 quote each, and we'll each vote on our favourite Stoic quote at the end of it. I think Margaret, as the guest, you will go last, so you'll have the trump card, if you will, to use common phrasing. But Joe, would you like to kick us off?
All right. So this is round 1, and I'm going to start with just a Marcus Aurelius classic. One line, and it is, "The best revenge is not to be like that."
Interesting. Okay. I'll go second. This is, again, I'm going with the granddaddy, in my eyes, Marcus Aurelius. "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength."
Not bad. Pretty stoic.
Yeah, I thought it was up there.
Could have been
Margaret,
better.
would you like to bring it home?
Well, I'll give you something from Seneca, perhaps a little bit of a gentler Stoic voice.
Very nice.
"Do you ask what progress I've made? I've begun to be a friend to myself."
Now that is stoic.
Look, when we were thinking of Stoic quotes, you just blew us out of the water, Margaret. Well done. I think I'm going to vote Margaret for round 1, favourite Stoic quote.
All right. I'm voting Margaret. Margaret, who are you voting?
Well, I like all 3 of them, actually. So for me, it's a tie.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
So Margaret wins round 1.
Margaret win rounds 1, 2-1. Congratulations. Okay, round 2. Don't expect such easy quotes going into future rounds, Margaret. Joe, take it away.
Okay, so round 2, I was tossing up between an Aurelius or a Seneca, or maybe spicing it up with a Cato, but I think I'm going to have to go the Aurelius again. So
You just can't keep away from him, can
no,
you?
I love it. Okay, here's my Aurelius. It is... Okay, it's kind of a long one. "Like seeing roasted meat and other dishes in front of you and suddenly realizing this is a dead fish, a dead bird, a dead pig. Perceptions like that, latching onto things and piercing through them so we see what we really are. That's what we need to do all the time, all through our lives when things lay claim to our trust, to lay them bare and see how pointless they are, to strip away the legend that encrusts them."
Boy, that's Stoic. Well done, Joe. Okay.
Angus?
Okay, this is another short, sweet one. I'm going to toss it up here with a bit of Seneca the Younger. "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity."
Not bad, not bad.
I do love a bit of Seneca. Okay, Margaret, bring it home.
I'll have to ask you for a source for that later.
I agree, Margaret. I agree.
Seneca again. So after all, Seneca is very dear to my heart. Yes. "Believe me, real joy is a serious matter. Do you think with a relaxed expression that one despises death, opens his home to poverty, reins in pleasure, and rehearses the endurance of pain? One who is pondering such things is experiencing a great joy, but hardly a soft or seductive one. This is the joy I want you to possess. You'll never run out of it once you learn where it's to be found."
God, that is stoic.
That is one of the most Stoic things I've ever heard.
All right, Margaret, who are you voting for? Round 2?
Well, not the dead pig.
Oh, yeah, but Angus didn't quote his source.
Seneca
You're voting for yourself, aren't you?
Yes, I did like the second one, but I don't know where it's from. It's, you see, and I'm a scholar, so I have a problem with that. Mine is from the 23rd letter of Seneca.
Well, Angus is claiming Seneca. I don't think he has a reference.
There will be a full referencing in the show notes. And Margaret, if you knew my professors at university, you know I do like to come up with an out there reference. But I'm going to have to vote for Margaret as well on this one.
Margaret, I'm voting for you as well.
Oh, she's taking out round
Thank
2.
you.
Oh my God. Presenting sponsor of the Jolly Swagman podcast is Glowbite.
Skype got you down? Not working for you?
Troubling guest who won't come onto the internet?
It's time to get Glowbite to help you go visit your guest in person in New Hampshire.
Jump on the plane, but before you do, grab a couple of Globot accessories from the website, free delivery on orders over $99, and then go and pester that person in person and get them on the pod.
It's actually a lot easier than using Skype, Google Hangouts, Zoom, any of that crap. Get Globite and fly to meet your guest in person.
Head to the website, www.globite.com, and use the discount code SWAGMAN to get 15% off all items.
Globite. You go.
We go.
This is kind of a pointless round 3, just because Margaret's already won the tournament, but we'll go ahead anyway.
Let's just be stoic and push through, Joe.
All right. So, look, I'm going to have to go with another Aurelius, just because it's such a banger, this one. All right. Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been.
That is pretty stoic.
Thanks.
That is actually so stoic that was going to be my third round ace in the hole. So you've just taken. But don't worry, I have backups. I'm just going to push through, be stoic, not let that worry.
All right, give it to us.
Mine's also an Aurelius.
Vintage.
The tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think, or do. Only what you do.
Oh, there were so many other quotes you could have gone with.
Mate, that's a banger. That's one of his that actually made his top 10 on the
quite
Christmas
like your
list.
first one.
Yeah, so do I. Yeah. Margaret,
Yes. And very good.
finish this
Very
guy
good.
off.
Yeah. Oh, now I have to give you an Epictetus.
Perfect.
Oh.
The founder of Stoicism, we should say.
Oh, absolutely not the founder of Stoicism. He was after Seneca.
Oh,
But,
we'll edit that
but
out.
he's one of the most sharpest-witted Stoics of them all. What
Go
then?
for it.
Sit down and pray that your nose may not run. You fool. Have you no hands? Wipe your own nose then, and don't blame God.
Wow.
That is stoic.
Saving the best for last. Margaret, congratulations. You've just won the inaugural Stoic Quote Tournament.
Congratulations, Margaret. What,
To be repeated many times.
what about that third and final quote appeals to you?
So, Epictetus is talking about your emotional well-being and about taking responsibility for it. So, blaming God, the equivalent, I suppose, is blaming your bad luck for things that have happened to you that have forced you to be unhappy. Nothing can make you be unhappy, not in Epictetus's universe. You need to take responsibility for being happy, for tending to your own emotional health, which you do by getting your values straight. When you learn to care about the things that belong to you, he would say, that is your own character, your own conduct, those are things you control, not God. And if that's really what you care about, then you will be happy.
I think that comes back to Joe's, I think it was his third quote about choosing not to be harmed and you won't be harmed. Much of the modern sort of take on Stoicism now is worrying about, they keep coming back to things that you can control, not worrying about outside factors that may impact you. And, you know, if someone...
Yes, that is.
If someone says something to, criticizes you, then really you only get upset. It's only upsetting if you allow it to be upsetting. So it's really just not worrying about the external noise going on.
Yes, I've had maybe less exposure to the modern Stoicism movement than some of your listeners perhaps have. That is, I'm a scholar. I work on these ancient texts. I spend a lot of time trying to recover what the ancient Stoic views actually were, and particularly in the area of the emotions. So I also am just learning about the modern Stoicism movement. But I think you're absolutely right that is the core of it for people like Ryan Holiday and for many people. They're looking for something that will encourage people to take responsibility for their own life and their own mentality. And ancient Stoicism is a great alternative to many of the religions that are out there for thinking really clearly about what matters to a person. I do have some problems with the notion of Stoicism as a kind of tough shell, or this idea that it's really about suppressing the emotions that you have, because I know from my studies that the ancient Stoics actually had a lot of room for emotional experience. The wise person, that's why I chose a quote about joy. The wise person is experiencing all kinds of joys, friendships, eagerness, many strong feelings. It's just that the feelings are directed to the right thing or the right things, the things that really matter.
Do you remember the moment you first discovered ancient Stoicism?
I do, actually. I was in school, predictably, and I had just finished my exams and was needing to be able to read. I'm in classics, so I did read both in Latin and in Greek, and I wanted to read some Latin prose, and picked up the letters of Seneca. And it's wonderful prose, it's wonderful reading in English or in Latin. But the thing that grabbed me was realizing that this book that I was reading a little bit of every day for practice was actually written to be read one letter a day. And the idea that there was an intelligence within that text that was working with me as a reader and trying to bring me along and bring me into a system, that was actually the first thing that grabbed me about Stoicism. And it's a matter of method, really, for philosophical writing. And then, I went on, I learned a whole lot more about the system, the physics, as you mentioned earlier in the podcast, a lot of stuff about the ethics. But I do still come back to Seneca for that aspect. It's something that I'm working on right now in my writing.
What are your daily Stoic practices that you've implemented in your life?
Well, I'm not sure I have any daily Stoic practices.
But there must be moments during the day when you might face adversity, or something might happen that things just never go to plan. So what have you taken away from your studies that you're able to implement in those instances to help overcome adversity or take a new perspective on things?
Well, I do think that this notion that I mentioned as a core for Epictetus, and it's a core for many modern Stoics, this notion of what you control and what you don't control is actually quite helpful when you come out of a difficult meeting and things have not gone the way that you meant them to go, or that you lost the vote or whatever. It is very comforting to be able to remind yourself that you managed your part all right, and that's actually what matters to you. I wouldn't describe it as a daily practice. It's more of an adversity management.
Is that what you would hope that young people who may not necessarily have an academic interest in ancient Stoicism, is that the kernel or the essence you hope they take from it?
From Stoicism?
Yeah.
If I could choose one thing that I would hope that a young person who was turning to ancient philosophy, not just Stoicism, but maybe Stoicism in particular, if I could choose one thing, it would be the commitment to the rule of reason. That is, there are things that make sense, and there are things that don't make sense. And you need to commit yourself to figuring out what makes sense, what's actually right. And in this current madness that we are in the world, so many people are promoting views from self-interested perspectives and telling you that that's right because it's what they need for you to believe. You control what you believe. You have reasons for the things you believe. You better make sure those make sense. And that is, for me, that is absolute core Stoicism.
In this day and age, then, it seems like Stoicism is making a bit of a resurgence. You see the likes of Tim Ferriss, Ryan Holiday, as we mentioned earlier, really starting to talk about, say, a modern take on this ancient philosophy. Why do you think it's become so popular in recent years?
It's a good question. One reason I think is that we have, through the internet, access to more text than we used to have. And some of the ancient Stoic texts really are just very accessible, easier to read and get right to the meat of it. Reading Marcus Aurelius or reading Epictetus or reading Seneca than to go and try to read Plato, for instance. Although there are some wonderful texts of Plato, but you go right to the heart of something you can use when you pick up Epictetus or Seneca. And people need that.
We have kind of a random question for you, Margaret, before we move on to our final five, and that is...
Oh boy, surprise question. Love it. Can't be surprised. I mean, some of us.
Well, yes. I mean, you can't control the questions, but you can control your answers to them. The question is, are there any other religions or cultures that evolved independently to ancient Stoicism that share some similar characteristics?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a Christian myself, and I find that a heavily Stoicized Christianity works pretty well. I'm not sure that you should say that they evolved entirely independently, because Stoicism was pretty influential throughout the ancient world. It was not influential on the Jewish scriptures, and I think probably not on the New Testament, but the development of Christian ethics was very likely influenced by Stoicism. However, how can I put this? Well, I guess I would say that at least as I understand Christian ethics, it is pretty compatible with Stoicism. But I understand it as a value system.
Got it. And okay. Buddhism as well, I think, would share some similar characteristics.
Mm-hmm. Yes, many people would name Buddhism. Yeah. Yeah, being okay with what happens, or trusting that the universe is all right without you managing it. Sure.
Yeah.
Just remembering one's place in the entire universe can sometimes be quite make things a little bit easier. It's now time to turn to our final five, which, as our listeners will know, are 5 rapid-fire questions to wrap up the podcast. Margaret, are you ready?
I suppose.
Question number 1, what's the first thing you do in the morning and the last thing that you do at night?
I drink a glass of water in the morning, and I read at night, but not Stoicism. I'm currently reading Faulkner.
Terrific.
Second question, Margaret. What's one thing you hold to be true that the rest of society doesn't agree with you on?
Well, I don't know about the rest of society, but I do hold one view that would perhaps sound peculiar to some people. I think it's possible to be friends, to have a genuine friendship with a book.
Please explain.
I can explain if you like. But
yeah. Yeah, we'll just leave that. We'll move on. Next question. No, please explain.
So you can know everything there is to know about that book. You can take it into you and live with it for a long period and go back to it and understand it better and more deeply. There's only so much that we know about our friends. And I'm not saying that our friends are not tremendously important to us, but no one human being is completely open with us in the way that our favorite books are. And it's possible to develop a relationship with that book, such that if whatever it was, David Copperfield or the Bible or the letters of Seneca, were removed from the universe, you would really have a loss, a real loss. It's a different relationship from the relationship with a human being, but it's a friendship.
Terrific. I think that's the... We've never got an answer like that before. That was our best answer. Oh, if everyone had answers that good, we'd be so much popular in there. So much more popular. Okay, Margaret, what's the worst piece of advice that you've ever been given in relation to your career?
I will tell you something that was perhaps not a bad piece of professional advice, but I still think it was terrible advice. It was when I was in graduate school. I was had a 2-year-old daughter at home, and I was under pressure from a certain professor to go to a certain evening lecture. And I explained, somewhat awkwardly, that I had been away from home 2 nights already that week, and I really needed to spend some time with my daughter that evening. And she told me in a rather clipped tone, "Well, she'll need to get used to it, won't she?"
Wow.
2 years old, she was. And it still makes me angry to think that I would be advised that I had to put her interests behind one night's lecture. I don't know if it's what you were looking for, but that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially from a female lecturer or a female professor. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Unbelievable. Okay. Next question.
Question number 4. Margaret, what is the last lie you told?
I don't lie.
Was that it?
I'm almost Kantian about it. I would rather get in trouble for telling the truth. It is perhaps it's my nature, but at most, I think that everyone does have those little white lies just to spare someone's feelings. Or if you're asked how you're feeling today, just as you're on your way to the restroom, that kind of thing. Or yes, the dress looks nice on you, but even that I don't like. I don't like to lie.
Margaret, do you have any ambitions so big you're almost embarrassed to talk about them?
That's a really funny question. You remind me of a friend that I had as an undergraduate, a fellow whose plan after graduation was to become a monk. And when people would ask him what he wanted to be, he would say, a saint. Perhaps I should go back to Seneca and say that the thing I would really like to achieve would be to work on this business of being a friend to oneself. That's a lot harder than it sounds.
Margaret Graver, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to another week on the Jolly Swagman podcast.
Before we go, I've got some outtakes. I've got some quotes that I didn't get to raise during the tournament.
Ooh, okay, Joe.
These are my backups.
Okay, number 1, hit it.
Well, I was a bit cut by the fact that I only used Aurelius, but here's a Seneca that I really like.
According to Joe, the founder of Stoicism.
That's Epictetus. Seneca, reading annexes another's life to our own.
God, that's Stoic.
Here's another Seneca. It's kind of like the Aurelius.
Hit me.
He suffers more than is necessary who suffers before it is necessary.
Gee, that is... Mate, if you pulled those out during the inaugural Stoic quote tournament, you may have just trumped Professor Graver.
I'm kind of regretting it now, because what I realised is she's more of a Seneca than an Aurelius lady.
I was picking that up, and you can tell a lot about a person by their favourite Stoic Stoic writer.
And just a final one to go out on. This is a Cato. Cato, the Roman senator, famous Republican.
Hit me.
So when someone asked him why he didn't have a statue, he was a man who would have deserved a statue in Rome, but conspicuously didn't have one. He famously replied, "I would much rather have men ask why I have no statue than why I have one at all."
On that note, I think we'll see you next week.
Rate and review us.
Bye.
Ciao.